Do you think you're authentic? I remember asking my date in 1965. I don't know. Hell, does anybody know? Is anybody really authentic? I don't know either. You know, when I was 2 years ago in high school, I didn't even know what the question meant. And now here I am as a sophomore, and I think it may be the most important question in my life. Actually, as I look back on that moment, I realized that it was the most important question in my life. I've devoted my life, both personally and academically, to the study of the nature of authenticity and what it means to be our most authentic, best self. My name is Gordon Medlock, and I'm a faculty member of the Wright Graduate University for the realization of human potential. I've been working with my colleagues, Drs. Bob and Judith Wright and Dr. Michael Zwell, and many other allies and colleagues that are too numerous to mention here, to create a curriculum to help individuals to become their most authentic selves and to develop the skills to be effective as transformational coaches and leaders. Today I'm going to talk to you about a part of that curriculum, the story of existential philosophy. I'm going to introduce you to the thought leaders that have really formulated the question of what it means to be authentic, from Socrates in ancient Greece to Soren, Kierkegaard, and Friedrich Nietzsche in the 19th century, to Martin Heidegger and Jean-Paul Sartre and Paul Tillich in the 20th. These are the legacy of that question. They're the ones that help us formulate the question that I'm proposing to talk about today. Now, I'm going to give you snapshots of them, about the way that they challenged me in the course of my development, and the way they challenge our students every day as they do their discussion posts and responses. And hopefully the way they'll challenge you today as you listen to this talk. So, let me take you back to 1964 when I first started the study of existential philosophy. It so happened I was at Northwestern University, which was the center at that time for the study of existential philosophy in the United States. Now, existential philosophy was not just an academic discipline, it was a living philosophy that students were living day to day. We were looking for new ways to liberate ourselves, finding new forms of freedom, questioning the status quo. There was the Black Power movement, there was the women's liberation and men's liberation movement, there was the anti-war movement. It was a time of revolution, a time of deep change. I'll never forget, as a freshman, taking my first philosophy course. I was reading the dialogues of Plato. And in the course of that, I was reading a text called The Last Days of Socrates. It was then that I met the man that would change my life. Let me give you a snapshot of who I experienced. Fellow Athenians, you are trying me today for the crime of heresy and the corrupting of the minds of youth. You claim that I question all the authorities and the gods that are approved by the state, and that I lead my students to do the same. Well, you're correct that I do this, but it's no crime. In fact, it is my calling to be a gadfly to your culture, to our culture, to create the best possible democracy we can by becoming more aware of who we are. Because when I explore and talk to the leaders of our people, they claim to know about things like what is the good or the just or the right or what it means to be pious. But when I question them, they don't really know. They're very confused. They don't know how to argue in a clear way for what they believe. They're just spouting the conventions of the time. You can't get to the question of truth by doing that. You have to begin from a place of not knowing, of what I call a state of ignorance from which the truth can emerge. This is my life commitment to do that work. And if you want to choose to put me to death for this so-called crime, so be it. For I'm not afraid of dying. What I'm afraid of is not living the life that I'm destined to live. And this is the life that I'm destined to live. And that is the thing I will do until the day I die. Wow. As a freshman, I was blown away. This, to me, was what education should be about. This was really the core question. How do we become who we are? How do I become someone who takes a stand like what I just read about? I was all in. So next year, as a sophomore, I said, what the heck? I'm going to dive into the deep end of the pool. I'm going to study Jean-Paul Sartre and his book, A Being in Nothingness. Now, if you've ever run into this text, it's a very heavy text. I mean, a lot of pages, and every paragraph is very dense. It's a tough read. I don't often recommend it to students. But there's a kernel of that book that had a profound influence on me. So profound, in fact, that it became the basis of my dissertation later when I went to graduate school at Yale. And it actually becomes a core part of the foundation of our curriculum here at Wright today. Let me tell you what I learned from Jean-Paul Sartre. Thank you, Mr. Medlock. I'm here to tell you today about the nature of freedom and personal responsibility. We are all charged to create our own lives. This is what it means to be a human being. We create this through the anxiety of freedom to step out of the familiar patterns of our life and the courage to create ourselves anew and to take responsibility for who it is we are to become. This is our destiny, if you will. I call this the original life project. It is the life project that we all live. And it begins in childhood. It begins as little children as we're working out the conflicts of the relationships with our parents and our family systems. Finding who we are and who we want to become at the same time that that family system is defining us and creating the circumstances with which we're going to have to resist to become who we are, or at least to use as a foundation for that. So it begins in childhood very early. At the same time, it's something that goes on throughout our entire life as we create new visions of what's possible for our life to be and try to realize those full potential. These are the challenges of either facing our future or telling the truth about our childhoods. And we know from Freud that it's very difficult for people to tell the truth about who they've been. We often want to deny who we were. We want to gloss over our childhoods or idealize them or maybe just repress them. I call this a form of bad faith. It's the act of denying who we have been and who we are. Or we want to deny our freedom, the potential that we have to become something new. We want to hold on to the security of the self that we know and are afraid to take the responsibility for stepping out beyond that. This is the other form of bad faith, to avoid our freedom. I'm afraid to say that I see this as the fate of mankind, that we are destined to be in bad faith, to deny who we are, our facticity, or to deny who we can become, our transcendence. I do see some hope, though. I do see a foundation for this life project that I speak of. I see it in the imaginative play of children, that capacity to create anew, to invent yourself in whatever situation you might be, to tap that child within us, to be able to express that part of ourselves. And I also see it in writers that I've studied and artists, and any individuals who've been willing to take a stand for something they believe to make a difference in the world, to use their creative imagination to envision something new and to call us to action. These, to me, are the touchstones of a possibly authentic life. Well, I was very stirred by Sartre's work. As I said, it became a foundation for my own life project. I knew at the time as a sophomore that I had not dealt with my own childhood. I hardly knew who I was. I knew I was riding over something. It felt like I was a persona that knew how to perform and do what I needed to do to make the family look good, but didn't really know who I was at the core of myself. That work would be my ongoing work as I developed and grew into an acceptance of who I was and what that childhood was about. At the same time, it led me to a deep study of psychology to understand how it is the self is created and how do I support other people in doing that. It became the foundation of my life project, the work I've been doing as a therapist, as a coach, and as a teacher. So, Mr. Sartre, I owe you a great debt. You had a profound influence on my life. But as great as Sartre was, he could not have existed if it weren't for the man that I studied my senior year, Martin Heidegger. He published a book called Being in Time. It came out earlier, but was translated in 1963 or 62, just before I was going to school. So I had the advantage and the opportunity to really study his work with professors very early on. Here's a nugget of what he taught me about what I need to look at in this journey. You see, Western man has forgotten an important question, the question of the meaning of being. We are so preoccupied with what we know, how to manage life, how to objectify and control and get the results we want, that we've forgotten how to be with life, how to be in the world and understand our relationship to nature and one another. This is the question of being. And I find that as each individual, we face that question in a unique situation where we realize that we are existing in the face of our own mortality, that we are existing toward the prospect of our own death. And when we contemplate that thought, it calls us to look at, well, how is it that I'm to live this life What is the purpose that I am best used for? How do I best express that to fulfill that unique potential for being that is mine? This is the call to being that comes from the encounter with non-being or the prospect of death. Well, I have to say, I was intrigued by what Heidegger had to say, but as a 21-year-old, this notion of living toward death seemed a little abstract to me. I got it conceptually. I think it was a good idea, but I didn't feel it in the way that he was talking about. It seemed like, well, something I'll get back to at some point. But as I prepared this talk today, I come at a very later time in my life to look at what Heidegger had to say. And I have a deeper sense of my own mortality, of not having a lot of time, of what time do I have and how do I want to spend it. And part of what I felt is that I want to spend it communicating this important tradition to you about what the story of existential philosophy is about. Because in our culture, I'm afraid we are going to lose touch with that. We're already just marginalizing it as a nice piece of history that we've already moved beyond, a phenomena of the 50s and 60s that we've now moved past. It would be a deep mistake for us to move past this philosophy. We need to retain this in our memory. We need individuals today more than ever who can stand up for themselves, who can speak up to authority, who are willing to assert values that they own and to take stands that they're willing to fight and die for if they need to. That quality is essential to the survival of our democracy. The memory of this tradition is a matter of life or death for us as a democracy. So, I could wrap up my talk right now. That's the gist of it, right? That's what it means to be authentic. But I would be remiss if I didn't also give you a flavor of the 19th century precursors of this philosophy, the beginnings of this in the modern times, Soren, Kierkegaard, and Friedrich Nietzsche. Let me give you a snapshot of them. Mr. Kierkegaard. I come to talk to you about faith. It's appropriate in this, our 500th year anniversary of the Reformation, when Luther described faith as the way for justifying our life and the way of salvation. But I think my people today have gotten too complacent. They think that faith is an easy thing. All I have to do is believe, and I'm guaranteed eternal life. What's the big deal? Life is easy. That's great. I'm here to tell you that faith is not that. Faith is the most difficult and challenging thing you can have. It is the commitment. It comes from a core of your being to declare what it is that is of ultimate meaning to you. What is your relationship to God as that which is the foundation of who you are, and to be totally dedicated and committed to realizing that. Now, as a Christian, for me, the guide for that is the greatest commandment Jesus taught us. To love thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. But to really believe that and have faith in that is to live that day to day, moment to moment in every decision. It is a one decision that you make that determines everything else that you do. This is the standard I hold you to, my fellow Danes, my fellow colleagues, my fellow people. To live faith in that way and to understand that it is the subjective truth of how we live in relationship to God and not some objective assurance of who God is that's important. It's the truth of subjectivity that I'm teaching you about today. Well, I find Kierkegaard very challenging. I find that notion of surrender at that level something that I've often wrestled with, that I would like to experience more in my life, but the surrender that it requires feels very threatening. I often find myself at the door of faith, there with fear and trembling to go in. Now, Mr. Nietzsche makes it even tougher. I am here to talk to you today about the death of God. Now, I don't mean just the death of God in some abstract way. I mean the God that is the core of the belief of the Christian religion that we're now operating with in our century. This religion teaches us to despise the body. It's sinful to be in touch with your body, to express your sensuality or your sexuality. We're supposed to be humble. We're supposed to be self-abnegating. It's not okay to affirm yourself. To affirm yourself is a matter of pride, and that's a matter of evil and being sinful. But what I have found in looking at the so-called good men of our society, these so-called righteous men, that within them there is a self-hatred and a resentment that's deep inside because they are denying within themselves the core to life, the expression of life, which is the foundation of who we are. They are, in a sense, killing off a part of themselves. And not only that, the followers of this religion then become incapable of standing up for themselves. They become sheep, following because they lack the will to power, which is the core of what it means to be a human being. So I preach to you the overman, the man who takes on the task of affirming life. And I have no guaranteed prescription for you on how to do that. I leave it to you to find the way beyond the traditional notions of good and evil. Well, Nietzsche offers us a very challenging question, and in some ways modern psychology, from Freud to many of the followers of Freud to humanistic psychology as well, have been exploring what that ethic might be that he prefigured for us. So, you have a flavor of the story of what it means to be authentic, to affirm life, to have a matter of faith, life of faith, to be able to question. How do we summarize all this and pull this together for you? I'm going to call on one other scholar, Paul Tillich, to provide a little bit of insight into that final wrap-up of the story of authenticity. Thank you, Mr. Medlock. My book, The Courage to Be, is one that I believe captures what I think is the essential story, because it begins with courage. The courage that we saw in Socrates, the courage to stand up for yourself, to assert yourself in the face of whatever opposition you might face. That courage in Greek philosophy is the courage to become who we can be, something noble, something worthy, something uplifting. This is the task of authenticity, to be something that we can admire, not just a complacent sense of who we might be already. And as for Mr. Kierkegaard, he teaches us about the importance of faith, that faith is this deep connection to what we call our ultimate concern in life. We all have a God that we have faith in. It might be money, it might be the state, it might be whatever. We all operate with some sense of that. But that transcendent sense of that ultimate concern is really where the core of authenticity comes from, that ability to orient yourself with deep passion and commitment to that principle. And as for Mr. Nietzsche, well, the notion of the will to power has often been misunderstood. But as I see power, power is the possibility of a being to actualize itself in the face of whatever opposition it might have from others or from within. It's an internal power to affirm life. This is what Mr. Nietzsche is talking to us about. And it is essential to the realization of what it means to be authentic. And as for Heidegger, he opens up for us another question. We learn from Nietzsche about the death of God, but it doesn't need to mean atheism. What it means is the death of the God of Theism, those defined senses we have of what God is, like it's a definite being that we can relate to. I propose that really what Heidegger is talking is that being is the source of our existence. It is the notion of transcendence, what we often call God. It is the God beyond God, a God that we don't know but that we sense and connect with. And through our openness and through meditative connection with the universe, we can come to find what it is that we're called to do through that connection. And finally, Mr. Sartre, he presents to us the challenge that existence precedes essence, that we define who we are through what we create. This is a theme throughout all of this work, that is through our choices and our actions that we define who we are as a person. Now let me just add one final point to this, that as we undertake this journey, I want you to understand that it also requires a certain humility. This world of becoming yourself as though it's something that's easy to do or that you can get the answer and then you've got it isn't the way it is. It's an ongoing process. We're always in the process. And we always need to look at our own fallibility. We don't really know. We are in the process of exploring who it is we're becoming. And the danger is to believe that somehow you've got the truth and that you can then impose it on others. This is the difference between the fanatic and the authentic person. The fanatic is driven by this absolute truth and emphatic certainty. The authentic person recognizes the sense that they are in a process of not knowing and discovering who they are rather than affirming that in an absolute way. So, I hope I've been helpful to you, Mr. Medlock. Very much so. I appreciate you sharing the importance of that openness to one another and the fact that this is not a solitary journey. It's a journey that we experience through support with one another. And the dialogue that we've had today, hopefully, has inspired and challenged you to look at your own meaning for you of your own life project and to understand the process of personal transformation. I hope you found it helpful and challenging. And thank you for listening.